You know what? Let's do it. Guild Wars 2's Heal Tempest, probably one of the best healers you can play. Incredible amounts of healing, incredible CC, movement, boons, an absolute god tier healer for raids, strikes, even some fractals, and especially on landscape, this class will shine above so many others. Let's have a look at why this class is just so damn good. And for the positives, Heal Tempest puts out the most healing out of any heal classes currently. It has so much consistent healing that this class can keep even the worst raid loops alive. The Heal Tempest is also not locked behind any of its utilities to generate Alacrity. This means that you can take all the utilities that you want to play in certain raid encounters. Your flexibility and fluidity of rotation are so high on this class that you're just going to get such an awesome feeling playing it. The versatility of the Heal Alac Tempest can take it from anywhere, from a support healer to a main tank with huge supporting utilities, or even playing some sort of hybrid celestial style to do a bit of healing and a bit of DPS. This class is absolutely incredible and one of my favorites. And for the negatives, Heal Tempest does not have a lot of access to CC abilities. This means it does lag behind other support healers like Druids and Scourgers in the Alac department. Also, you can get atonement lock, which means you won't be able to get access back to certain atonements if you need them for some reasons. This means that you need high mastery of the fights or the encounters to make sure that you know exactly what's coming so that you can pre-plan your rotation. And now let's have a look at some gear and stats. This is going to be an incredibly loosened stats guide, just like some of my other heal ones. The idea basically is to try aim for a fairly high boon duration. 95 to 95.33 is generally what you're aiming for. That way you will cap your boon duration. So that means you can use a combination of minstrels, givers, harriers, magi's, whatever you want to try and make this up. Obviously, the more you stick towards harriers, the less of the tank you'll be. The more you go into givers / minstrels or whatever you like, the more chance you have of being the main tank. And for runes, you want Rune of the Monk. This is always going to be meta for boon healers. Although if you are struggling for gold, you can consider the superior Rune of Rebirth, i.e. this allows you to ignore the next lethal blow, as well as Rune of Flock. These are cheap alternatives. You can even consider Rune of Barrier, which comes out of dungeons if you do want a little bit of tanker survivability. But Rune of the Monk will always be meta. And for your weapons, you want to have a dagger in your main hand and a warhorn in your offhand. You can have a build with a staff, but this won't be very effective in raiding itself. This is more for like landscape, and certain encounters can be quite fun to play. It's a lot more range sustain healing, but to get the boons that we need to make a raid group viable for roll compression, a dagger warhorn is the way to play. For sigils, you want Sigil of Transference. That 10% outgoing healing is just too good not to have on all heal builds. And on your off sigil, you either want the Sigil of Water, Paralyzation, either Sigil Concentration, or something else. Maybe you take Sigil of Frailty or something like this to help out some vulnerability stacks. But Sigil of Water is a fairly good option to have. If you do tend to play a Celestial hybrid build with a bit of healing and a bit of DPS, you can obviously also have a Scepter in your main hand. This will allow you to do a little bit of ranged DPS, a little bit of ranged healing, and overall you'll still have a lot of support with the Warhorn. And for food and utilities, you've got a couple of options. Obviously, you want to try use some healing food if you really want to go try hard. 100 healing power, 70 concentration, especially if you are putting your boon duration below 100%. But hey, if you want to play the DPS style, you can always switch a couple of pieces, push up the boon duration, and switch to some DPS food. For utilities, obviously bountiful maintenance oils are always going to be meta for boon healers. It's just the way it is. Although you can always go for some other options. Maybe if you are playing a bit of a DPS style, you can go for some DPS maintenance oils, or even ones that provide concentration if you are going to run Celestial gear and your boon duration might be a little bit lower. Now let's have a look at the trait tree. The trait tree of the Tempest is going to vary so much depending on what your job description is, what you're looking out for, what are you struggling to keep up. You can change this build around in so many different ways. Let's have a look at one of my general builds and then we're going to play around with it from there. For our first specialization, Water. Your first minor trait is a massive trait, Soothing Mist. Basically, for 10 seconds while attuned to water, you'll be getting a heal every 3 seconds and it heals 5 targets. This is just passive healing that's going to be on you, and it's affected by a later on trait that makes it double as effective. This is a massive healing skill and one that we do need to try keep up. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how Tempest or Elementalist works in general, we switch elements. This effect is only present when you enter water stance, but it will remain on you for 10 seconds. That means that if we leave water stance, say going into fire, we will keep this buff on us. So if we can return before this expires, we will obviously maintain this buff. And that's kind of the idea. We want to try and maintain that as much as possible. Obviously, we will have Alacrity, which will make these cooldowns a lot quicker, and this is going to help us maintain this buff. Now in column 1, there are a few good options that we have to be aware of. Soothing Mist, obviously, we gain regeneration and frost aura when we critically hit. Our crit chance or micro chance in particular is very low, just under 10%. Obviously with a bit of fury that will change. But this has a 20-second cooldown and it's only 7 seconds of regen with a 4-second frost aura. It's okay to have, especially if you are tanking. It's not a bad idea. But piercing shards is a really good option. This increases the vulnerability duration we cause, as well as increases our damage to vulnerable foes, and this bonus is doubled when we are attuned to water. We do have quite a fair amount of vulnerability stacking skills. This makes this trait probably meta to use, especially if you aren't tanking and you don't need the extra survivability. You're helping the group cap its vulnerability. That's helping all the other classes do so much DPS. As well, our vulnerability duration is fairly good, and this allows, especially in 5-man groups, for some big DPS. The last choice in column 1, stop, drop and roll, is not a bad skill to use if you are in fights where there is burn-in and chill. This isn't as often. This is also AoE, so you're helping your allies, but it is on a 10-second cooldown, and that just kind of makes the skill a little bit less attractive on PvE. Minor trait 2, Healing Ripple. Basically a massive 5-person heal when attuned into water. Obviously note the 240 radius, but this is quite a clutch skill. When you get into water, you don't even have to heal initially because you get this minor burst, and this allows you to plan your other heal skills so that you don't burn them too quickly. Now in column 2, Soothing Disruption, not a bad skill if you do want to get a few boons, if you are taking cantrip utilities, but generally we're not really taking them, making the skill slightly redundant, although not a bad option if you are struggling for regeneration and vigor. Cleansing Wave is massive. When attuned into water, we remove a condition from 5 targets. This can be pretty big, as that is probably one of the sore parts of Tempest, is it doesn't have as much Condi Cleanse as other heal classes. So this is quite an important skill, but can be switched out in some fights where you don't need Condi Cleanse. And the last trait, Flow Like Water, increasing your damage when your health is above 75%. It's not really as important, but as a healer, this one could be important. Blocking and evading attacks heals you for a little bit. This is on a 10-second cooldown. This could be fairly good if you are the tank and you are struggling to keep yourself alive. It is an option. Minor trait 3, Aquamonster's Training. This skill is deceptively good. You won't even realize until you realize what you're losing not having this skill. Basically, increased healing to allies, yes, that's good, 15%. But the most important, water weapon skills gain reduced recharge. What this means is all your skills have shorter cooldowns by 20%, making skills like your Warhorn 5, instead of 35 seconds base, 28 seconds base. That is huge, because that effective with Alacrity will just get even shorter. In column 3 of water, Cleansing Waters, removing a condition when you grant an ally regeneration, pretty good. It can especially be useful in certain fights like your Slow Bazaars and your Soulless Horrors, where condis might be an issue. 2, Powerful Auras. Any aura you grant yourself is granted to your party. This can also be fairly good, especially if you are playing more with your auras. These can be quite effective. Although Soothing Power is huge. This increases Soothing Mist effectiveness by 100%, making it a 4k heal rather than a 2k heal. This skill is absolutely massive for just some passive healing. Generally, I would leave this on, although you can look at these options based on the fights. Now from here, we've got two ways we can go. I'm going to go for the more heal-centered approach, and that's to go into Arcane. Minor trait 1, Arcane Prowess, 1 stack of Might. Not something too exciting, although this does encourage you to just switch to all elements to try and stack some free Might. In column 1, first choice, Arcane Precision. What this allows you to do is when you crit, you have a 33% chance to apply one of these conditions. Generally, we want the vulnerability or maybe the weakness for some soft CC. This can be fairly good. Number 2, renewing stamina, gaining vigor when you critically strike a foe. This can be fairly good to try keep some high vigor uptime so that you've got dodges, especially if you are tanking. And thirdly, Arcane Restoration. When swapping atonements, you get a small heal. This seems quite small, but switching in between all these atonements quite quickly can kind of create a decent burst healing effect. Minor trait 2, Elemental Atonement. When switching atonements, you gain a boon based on the atonement. This is quite a good skill as well. Remember, we're getting some extra regeneration, which could cause cleanses if we've traded like this, some higher prot, some might. Now in column 2, the absolute mammoth trait, Arcane Resurrection. Huge skill. When reviving a downed ally, not only will you cast a geyser which helps revive, heals all the targets around you, all the targets that aren't in down state, and is also a water field. It also provides you with an aura based on your atonement. So if you're, for instance, in the water, you'll get the frost aura for 5 seconds, so you've got minus 10% incoming damage. Or if you're in earth, you've got projectile reflect. This can be incredibly massive and probably one of the best meta choices. But if you are an elite group and you don't foresee people going downstate for some reason, Elemental Lockdown is not a bad skill at all. When disabling a foe, you will gain boons based on your current atonement. This can be quite massive to get some quite decent boons, especially the 5 stacks of might. If not, also Final Shielding. Cast lesser Arcane Shield when using your elite skill. This can be fairly good for some blocking, especially if you are tanking. Minor trait 3, Elemental Enhancement. One of those, again, super deceptive skills. Gain increased concentration, i.e. boon duration, but not only that, gain reduced recharge on your atonement skills. That means that when overloading, instead of having to wait 20 seconds base, it's 17.5. Also, with this affected with Alacrity, will help it get it just over 13 seconds. That's fairly good because remember, we want to try and juggle Soothing Mists and skills like this. So this skill right here is really good. And in column 3, the top choice should be Evasive Arcana. What this does is when you dodge based on your atonement, you will cast skill. You can notice if you use your right click over here that these skills will show you. For instance, in water, you cast Cleansing Wave, i.e. a decent burst heal with a Condi Cleanse. So i.e. dodging inside of your water atonement is actually a Condi Cleanse. And if for instance you dodge inside of your earth atonement, it's a blast finisher which can be used to stack a bit of might. Now if you are playing on landscape or you're playing a celestial style of build, you can have a look at Elemental Surge. What this allows you to do is when casting arcane utility skills, it will produce one of these conditions based on your atonement as well as providing you with some ferocity. It's okay, but I mean, if you are playing a healer, I would rather stick with straight 1. And again, also another option to have a look at, Bountiful Power. If you are playing some sort of DPS hybrid, you can have a look at this just to up your DPS slightly. Now for more of your Auramancer kind of build, you can go into Air. Zephyr Speed, increasing your crit chance by 5% as well as movement speed while attuned to air. In column 1, Zephyr's boon, obviously quite decent, granting Fury and Swiftness to allies that you grant auras to. This combos quite well with powerful auras in your water, and this is why this build is fairly good in some situations. Now if you are playing landscape or maybe some meta event, 1 with air is not the worst traits in the world. Gaining super speed when attuned into air can be quite fun for that speed burst. In column 2, Inscriptions, not the worst skill in the world, basically getting some extra boons when attuned based on casting a glyph skill. It's not the greatest skill though, wouldn't really bother with it, but it is a way to get some boons. Raging Storm, quite decent, increase in our ferocity when affected with Fury. This can be quite good, especially if you are playing a bit more of a power bursty build. You can obviously try and get as much ferocity as possible through certain traits. But what makes column 2 very good is Storm Soul. What this does is it increases your damage to disabled or defined foes, i.e. bosses, which is fairly good, especially if you are playing the DPS variety. But what makes this skill incredibly good is the outgoing stun duration is increased. This is almost like the Druid with Marksman increasing their stun duration. This is the same effect. And this makes certain skills quite good and helps you with your CC, which is very lacking on a Tempest in general. This is also quite good for certain fights like statues in Wing 5. This will allow you to do some stunning and hold down the eyes. Minor Trait 3 or a monster training, again, a very good skill to have. Increased ferocity, additional ferocity when in air, and also all your air skills will have reduced cooldown, which is fairly good. Now column 3 is quite interesting. Bolt to the Heart, obviously fairly good. Increased damage towards the end of the fight, the last 50%. Fresh Air, being able to attune back to air when crit hitting, as well as gaining ferocity. This can be fairly good as well. I like to keep this on so I can know I can get back to air for my stuns, but a lot of people use Lightning Rod as the meta. Cast Lightning Rod when you disable a foe, i.e. grant some weakness, a little bit of damage, but the weakness being a soft CC will help you with your CC bars. And now onto the elite specialization, Tempest. Your first minor trait is your overload. So this allows you to overload your atonement currently to provide some extra boons, i.e. when you use this skill, you will channel and therefore grant yourself Alacrity, obviously because of the traits we've chosen, but most of all, this aura effect with some additional boons. In column 1, Gale Song, giving protection to allies when using your healing skill. This can be fairly good if you are struggling to keep up protection uptime, although I do not really recommend this as it is kind of a bit of a waste of a trait where there are better choices. But if you are struggling with your prod uptime, this can be an option for you. The meta choice most of the time is Latent Stamina. Grant vigor to nearby allies when atoning to water. This also will give them 10 endurance off the bat. This is quite a good skill to make sure that your vigor uptime is good. A lot of classes do require vigor at the moment to do some big DPS, as well as just general survival. Even in pug groups, having extra dodges just means people have less chance of dying. Although if you do feel like your vigor uptime is fine, you can go for Unstable Conduit. When you complete overloads, you get auras based on the overload itself. This can be quite good for some extra DPS survivability and just general gameplay. Minor Trait 2, Gathered Focus. Gaining concentration as well as additional concentration when your health is above 90%. This is quite massive because this allows us to go into other pieces of gear, like your Minstrels or your Magi's pieces, to try get some extra stats in other departments. In column 2, I don't even know how to say this, Tempest Aria, basically gaining some might when using shout abilities. It's fairly good, but most of all, the actual buff itself, the increased outgoing damage and addition damage. This can be fairly good if you are playing the Celestial or the Hybrid build with a little bit of DPS. This can just help you pike up your DPS a little bit more, as well as maintain some decent might output. The second choice though, Harmonious Conduit, is probably one of the traits I would recommend to newer players in the beginning. What this allows you to do is get some swiftness as well as stability when you start an overload. Generally, if you do not complete an overload, you aren't going to get your maximum amount of alacrity. This means that this trait can help newer players that have bad positioning to not get knocked down or to be interrupted from casting their overloads, to make sure that they are gaining the amount of alacrity that you need to sustain a group. So yes, I do highly recommend this for newer players. But the final choice, Invigorated Torrents, is meta. For most players, this will be the way to go, to just get that regeneration as well as vigor uptime. Basically, when you grant auras, you also grant vigor and regeneration, and there is no cooldown on this, which means you can stack quite high amounts of vigor and regen. And because of my playstyle, that's why I don't usually go into Latent Stamina, but I'd rather go into Unstable Conduits, is to actually proc this as much as possible. Minor Trait 3, and probably the best part about Heal Tempest, Hardy Conduits. When you do overloads, you grant protection as well. As you can see here, the overload has protection attached to it, but not only that, protection is 20% more effective, i.e. instead of it being 33%, it's up on 39.5%. It is huge for your survivability. And in column 3, there's only one choice, Lucid Singularity. This is the trait that allows us to stack Alacrity when using overloads, i.e. when we begin an overload, for every pulse we'll gain 2 seconds, and when we complete an overload we'll gain an additional 8 seconds of Alacrity. This is based off of my boon duration obviously, but this is a huge skill to have and basically what makes this build as good as it is. Now let's have a look at the utilities. It's going to be quite tough because basically everything is fair game. For the healing skill, it's quite simple. We're going to go for Wash the Pain Away. Absolutely gigantic heal that pulsates out from you with different pulses, removes a condi, and is a good 5 target heal. Remember also the radius extends from the first to the second to the third heal. So this will reach targets that are quite far away from you. But obviously the first heal is the strongest. So try get your group to stack up better if you want to keep them alive. Now probably the only trait that I would say is probably non-negotiable Aftershock is a decent amount of protection, Aegis, Cripple, Immobilize, as well as a Blast Finisher and a Projectile Reflect. This skill is incredibly useful in so many fights. And then another incredible utility that I highly recommend, Conjure Frostbow. You'll notice that this increases your condition duration, but not just that, 180 healing power. This will apply only when you throw down the Frostbow. So when you throw the Frostbow down, you are going to get this extra healing power. Not just that, the Frostbow in your hand will last for 30 seconds, but you've thrown an extra one down. So you can pick this one up. Even without Alacrity, you can maintain this completely. This means that this skill is incredibly useful as well, just for keeping up that extra healing power. The auto attack is a massive heal, good sustained heal, and there's no charges. You can just keep on spamming this for some big heal, and when you see it blinking, go pick up your second bow, and there you go. You've got this for another 30 seconds. Now, even though I didn't really want to go into anything about a rotation concept, the auto attack, the skill 1, increases your healing to allies by 10%, and there are 2 stacks. So that's 20% outgoing healing to allies, which is fairly good. Skill number 2, some big damage as well as vulnerability, and also combo finisher projectiles. Skill 3, massive chill. This is good for some soft CC as well as taking care of adds in fights. Skill 4, Froststorm. Basically it's just some big damage, a little bit of bleed, but not really anything too much to be excited about. But skill 5 is incredible. Deep Freeze, a 3-second stun as well as a half a second if we do have water arrow stacks. So if we have 2 water arrow stacks, this is increased by another second. So that means a 4-second stun. That is gigantic Defiance Break Bar. Now let's have a look at some of the other utilities that you could consider. Feel the Burn, 5 stacks of might on a fairly decent duration, as well as Fire Aura. This is a fairly good way to stack some might without having to worry too much about your weapon skills. Flash Freeze, just a chance for a bit of chill, regen, as well as Frost Aura, which is minus incoming damage for your party. It's fairly good, not too exciting though. Either the Storm has become a lot better than it used to be, 5 seconds of super speed for the group, swiftness, stability, as well as a stun break. It's very good skill to use in certain fights. Conjure Lightning Hammer can be a fairly good skill to have with you if you are in charge of dealing with adds. It does give you access to a push which should be used in certain fights like your Samrogs and your Solus Horus to try and deal with adds. The Signet of Water, incredibly good to have with you. It reduces the incoming condition duration on you passively, but when used active is a fairly decent heal, as well as revives allies at a percentage rate. So this is quite a decent skill to use if you need to get some decent healing from range. You kind of can just go throw this down if you see that your team is reviving someone and maybe you can't get there. This will obviously just help heal them and also help revive. Now when it comes to glyphs, there are 2 decent glyphs. Glyph of Lesser Elemental. Funny enough, you would think you would go into water, but no. Going into fire and casting this will create a fire elemental which will help you with your might stacking. Now with your lesser elements glyph, you'll be able to maintain 2 to 3 of these guys, and they will definitely help you stack a ton of might, and are definitely fairly useful in most situations. Another interesting glyph, the Glyph of Renewal. This allows you to revive down allies, but also has a unique effect per every single atonement. I.e., Renewal of Water will revive the target at 100% health, which is fairly good for a lot of times, especially if it's the tank that's going down state. Renewal of Air will revive the target and teleport it to you, which can be flippin' good to get them out of some bad downstate areas, especially in fights like Slothazar and things like this. And an absolute clutch one, Renewal of Earth will revive 3 targets, not just one, in a fairly big AoE. Renewal of Fire, a good skill to have to almost precast. What this allows you to do is get a buff that lasts you for 15 seconds, and if you go downstate with this buff on, it will instantly revive you. So this can be fairly good in certain situations where you feel like someone is not handling the mechanic properly. Maybe you're in QTP and you see him shooting the lightning straight at a target and they don't know how to dodge. This is quite a decent skill to make sure that they don't actually die. And then a couple of honorable mentions. Arcane Shield, blocking the next 3 attacks, i.e. you got 3 stacks. It's also a stun break. This can be a very good skill. A lot of newer players might use this when overloading to make sure that they're not knocked out of their overload, which is fairly good. As well, you've got skills like Misform, which basically prevents you from all damage, as well as gives you increased movement speed and a stun break. This can be fairly good to try get yourself out of some bad situations, especially if you are a newer player. You've also got things like Armor of Earth, which grant you barrier protection and stability, as well as a stun break, which can be fairly good, especially if you are in the landscape. And there's a couple of options to play around with. My word, Elementalist is just incredible with utility. It's like Scourge, and they were kind of in the same boat. Both of them used to be absolute god tier healers, but without any other utility, i.e. roll compression was just lacking on them. And due to these current patches, we've seen them be played because they can provide Alacrity now. Both of them are seeing a lot more play, and I'm loving it. And for the elite utilities, we have probably 2 only options. Rebound. A shout skill where basically for 5 seconds, your party cannot die. So if you go downstate in that 5 seconds, instead of going downstate, you're healed and you've granted Fury. Now, if the skill's used and expires, i.e. you do not go downstate in that 5 seconds, you will gain an aura based on your atonement. Sometimes the skill might be used just for the actual auras itself, but with such a long cooldown, I only use this skill if I do foresee us dying. You know, sometimes you do have certain fights or times like, you know, Masada Overseer, maybe your group doesn't dodge when the soldiers explode. And it's a great skill just to cast to make sure that you don't go downstate and you can just carry on DPS in the boss. Or in fights like Severe, where maybe you don't want to take the tornado up, perhaps you just say to your entire party, stay down, we're DPSing, and you just eat the shockwave and just carry on going. The other elite skill that I do tend to enjoy is Glyph of Elements because of the shorter cooldown. Using this inside your water atonement will obviously give you a decent ice elemental that heals and damages, and it's got a fairly long duration. This is quite a good skill and definitely one that I would use for some good passive healing. And now to the tough part of the guide, the rotation concept. What we are going to do is we're going to combine this with our weapon skills because some of these weapon skills are just too loaded. So we need to talk about them in unison. Remember, with the rotation concept as a support healer, especially as an Alacrity support healer, our mindset needs to be, let's get Might and Fury capped ASAP and then provide us with some Alacrity. But luckily with the Alacrity Tempest, these are intertwined. So we will be providing Might and Alacrity at the same time. This makes it quite easy. Now, if we're on landscape, we want to try to do this a little bit before the fight, but in raiding, obviously, we can't because of boon strip. So what we want to do is obviously we're going to use our F1 skill. This is going to stack up quite a lot of Might as well as Alacrity. We want to fully channel this and then use Warhorn 4. What this does is it basically copies a lot of the Might, gives us some extra Might stacks, as well as Fury if there is any to copy. Then what we want to do is possibly drop down skill 5. Skill 5 is a fire field. This is quite important to know. Obviously you can use skill 3, but this will change your positioning, and therefore I don't like to use it for the fire field effect. Once we have dropped down skill 5, we've got a couple of options here. If we do not need Aftershock, i.e. our Aegis, we can blast skill 5 with our Aftershock, because this is a blast finisher, remember. That's going to help us get our Might up even higher. However, if you do want to save Aftershock, once dropping skill 5, you go to Water and drop skill 3, you will be able to blast with Frozen Burst, as this is a blast finisher, giving us some extra Might. That little combination right there should help you get a decent Might stack up. So now we've got a couple of options. If we do require healing, our bread and butter heals is obviously skill 2 is a huge heal. Remember, this is aimed, so we need to aim it correctly. As well, skill 4 to get some extra regen and healing. Remember, this skill is aimed, so we need to make sure it's hitting the right people. And as well, skill 5. What I like to do is just take maybe a step or two back to cast a skill. This skill will heal everybody that's inside of this. And as well, the longer they're inside there, the more pulses of heals they will get. Although if our group does not require healing, we can go elsewhere. Now our mindset needs to be that we can't let our might, alacrity, and the like drop off. I like to go straight to earth to hit Warhorn 4. What this does is it applies protection, but not just that, it extends the duration of all boons currently existing on us and allies. And we gain magnetic aura. This is massive because this is not just a blast finisher, protection, but it's also extending boons. And remember, when we grant auras, we're going to get ourselves vigor and regeneration as well. So this is incredibly important and needs to be in your mindset to get into earth and try to pass the skill. Now, obviously, every fight in every raid group is going to have a different experience on raids. My mindset, if I can help it, is to not overload in water unless I need to overload in water. And the reason why is when overloading, you put the skill on a 17-second cooldown. However, if you swap to a skill and you drop out of an atonement, you only put it on like an 8-9 second cooldown. So that means that we can get to water to kind of try maintain soothing mists. I.e., if I want to overload, I will always try overload in fire and in earth. If I need to overload in water for the heals, I will do it, and that means that I'll just drop soothing mist off. But that's fine because you needed to do it. You needed to keep a group alive. That's why it's impossible for me to say to you, this is the rotation. The only reason why I can tell you this at the moment is the general might stacking and getting your alacrity up rotation is quite set in stone, right? You're going to hit your F1, overload in fire. You're going to copy the boots with heatsink. You're going to drop down a fire field. You're going to go blast it if possible and then go to earth and use Warhorn 4. And that's kind of it. Then you're at the point where all the boons are up. You know, you could obviously have thrown in the regeneration in water itself, but now your boons are present. Then your mindset needs to be, what's coming up next? Is there going to be CC? Don't go into air. We want to have air ready for CC. And when CC appears, we go into air. You know that your skill 3 is obviously an aura, which will produce some CC itself, a Defiance bar, as well as skill 4, Cyclone, a decent CC skill. So we need to keep air open so that we do have access to CC. Now, obviously, if we do have no other sources of Fury, we can obviously use skill 2 in air to try and get Fury, and then copy those durations with either your F1, skill 4 to copy your Fury duration, or go into earth and use skill 4 to extend the boon duration. This is paramount to make sure that we're keeping up our might, our fury, and our alacrity as well as protection. That's your job as a healer. Remember this. If you can keep up protection and regeneration, your job is half done as a healer. And if you can keep up the rest of the boons, you're doing an absolute perfect job. Cool. Now you've got all your boons up. You're just maintaining and managing your boons. Now what do you do from here? If you do expect some heavy incoming damage coming in, you need to get down your Conjured Frostbow. This is a massive skill. This gives you access obviously to the arrows that we've gone over. The auto attack is a huge consistent healing. There are no charges, there's duration. You have 30 seconds to use this. If you're just spamming your auto attack, you're pumping out some decent healing as well as slight bits of damage. There's also a secondary arrow here. So this one in my hand lasts for 30 seconds. The one on the ground lasts slightly longer. So I'm going to estimate it about 32, 33 seconds. So even when the one in my hand disappears, I can still walk over and go pick this one up before it disappears too. But what this also allows you to do is, if you're in certain fights like Samron, perhaps you have a DPS in your group that is not very good for CC, maybe something like a Vindicator, you can throw down the bow, use the Ice Bow 5 yourself, and the Vindicator can pick up the bow that you've thrown onto the floor and also use Ice Bow 5. This will help classes that don't even bring much CC get some extra CC. Then you can both just auto attack to passively heal the chap that's on the floor until the CC bar is broken. Both drop your ice bows and carry on with your rotations. Also notice this really cool thing. When you've thrown down your bow and you have access to these skills, you can still overload. You can overload and you can cast utilities. So you can still cast the utility to get your flame elementals up to stack some might. So that way you don't even really have to break your rotational flow. You can still be stacking might, overloading to drop alacrity, everything. You can even switch out, go hit your Warhorn 4 and then go pick up the other bow and carry on healing. This is huge utility and just so much convenience for the heal Alac Tempest just to give so many boons while playing the style of play they want to play. Now that you've got the idea of boons and healing, you've got a lot of other skills that you can play with. There's blinds, there's obviously evade frames, there's projectile blocks that you can use. There's so many other skills that you can do. But know this, you can maintain pretty much all your boons just off of your weapon skills and attune into different elements. That means that all your utility skills that you have are for just making that job easier. If you need extra prot, you use an aftershock. If you want some extra might, just use the lesser elements or obviously feel the burn. You're using your utilities to try loosen up your rotation so that you can react the way you want to react. That's why playing Tempest is so fun, because you can basically set the pace of your own gameplay. You can play as some sort of celestial hybrid and try to do DPS with creating all of these boons and healing. So in summation, if you want to play in an absolute incredibly fun god tier healing class, Heal Tempest is the healer for you. This class is incredibly fun to play. It was my first character I ever made in Guild Wars 2. And I highly recommend it to anyone who's just playing the game and loving it. If you're playing on landscape, don't forget you can always just whip out a staff and just not worry about boons. Just be like, I don't care about the might and whatever. Yes, I'll provide you with some alacrity, but my healing will keep this entire meta group, landscape group alive with just some overpowered healing. Or if you want to get more into the nitty gritties, go ahead and play yourself some Alac Boon Heal Tempest. It's so fun and I cannot recommend it enough. If you've enjoyed this guide, please give it a like and a subscribe. I'm really enjoying making these guides recently. I'm learning a lot more and just having so much fun. If you've enjoyed it, I thank you so much. If you haven't enjoyed it, thanks for watching anyway. And yeah, man, I hope I see you guys in the next one. Cheers. For more on this build and others just like it, catch me streaming on Twitch. Stop by anytime and hang out. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and share with some friends. It will really help grow the channel.